Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Behind the Frame. As you've seen over the past couple of weeks, myself and fellow guides, we select an image from one of our previous trips, one of our favorite images, and we then edit it, and we also explain a little bit behind the photograph and why it is one of our favorites. This week I'm going to be editing an image of a chimpanzee from a safari I hosted, Best of Uganda, in June of last year. It's one of my favorite images. I'm going to do a slightly different edit for you today. I'm going to edit it into black and white. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Okay, so as I mentioned, I've been going to Uganda the last couple of years, hosting the Best of Uganda Safari, which goes to Kibale for chimpanzees, then Queen Elizabeth National Park for tree climbing lions, and then we end off in Burundi for the gorillas. And what I wanted to do today was to edit an image for you all into a black and white. And if you have a look at the image, this is the raw file. You can see, so what I really like about this image is them looking up. You know, Uganda and gorillas and chimps are one of the most difficult subjects I've had to photograph, and the reason being is there's numerous elements that go into photographing them. Firstly, they are quite dark subjects. You are in the forests, which are fairly dense, and it all just depends on where the animals are. But what is tricky for me is to try and get the exposure right, considering you've got dark animals, light, shade areas, but you can also use this to your advantage. And if you have a look at the image that I took, you can see this is quite a tight shot of a chimpanzee looking up. And why I really like it is when they're sitting down and they're foraging and they're looking down, it's very difficult to get any sort of color through the eyes or any kind of facial expression. So you're really looking for those key moments when you're photographing individuals where they give you a chance when they look up, and especially if they're sitting in a pocket of light with this dappled light around them. So you can see I've gone fairly tight in on this shot, and I'm going to take you through my process of editing this image into black and white. It is going to be a little bit more of a dramatic edit. It will be a nice color edit as well, but what I really like about this image is the light on the face. You can see the eyes, there's a twinkle in the eyes, and you've got that staring upward motion from the chimp. So what actually happened here was there was a couple of chimps up in the trees making a lot of noise, and it got this chimp's attention, and for a couple of seconds the chimp looked up and we were able to get some great shots of it. So I'm going to walk you through my editing process. As always, looking at the basic menu, I come down. Once again, I'm not going to use exposure, contrast. I'm happy with the light on the face here. Looking at the histogram, the dark areas, so these shaded areas below the chin, the trees at the back, I haven't burnt out any of the dark areas. And also light areas, although it looks very light, I haven't blown out or washed out the white areas either. So I'm fairly happy with the histogram. I've got a lot of detail to work with here. And considering that I'm going to edit it in a black and white image, I'm going to press a V straight into black and white, and I'll start from here. So typically my process would be to have a look at the crop of the image, the composition. I'm fairly happy with I'm very happy with the composition in this image, so I'm not going to do too much in terms of a crop. I'm going to leave it pretty much as is, and I also look around the frame's edges. So quite important, it's not always something we remember out in the field, but just have a look around the edges and see if there's anything that is distracting. There's nothing really. I mean, you've got these sticks and branches in the background that leave the frame's edges, but there's not too much I can do about that in this situation. So V straight into black and white. I'm going to go straight to the whites and blacks as I always do, pressing down Okay, I'm going to leave that as it is. This is slightly overexposed. I'm not going to worry too much about that. What I'm going to do is later on I'm going to eliminate that because that is quite distracting, especially if we want to emphasize this facial expression and the eye contact and looking up into the frame. I really like this composition just because it is left-hand side of the frame, and I've left negative space on the right-hand side and the top of the screen for the chimp to look into. Okay, so blacks here as well. Let's see. I don't want to burn out anything. I'm not too worried if I do darken these areas and burn out the dark areas here. That's not where my focus is. My focus is here. So once again, I like to try and create contrast using these sliders here. Just with the histogram and these light areas in the back, I don't want to blow it out too much. So I want to emphasize the face here. So with all my editing and each photograph that I edit, I take on its merit. So I have a basic starting point where I go through my cropping process, the whites and the blacks, and I assess the image and what I want to try and enhance in that image. Being a black and white image, it takes a little bit more editing. It is a little bit more of an artistic image. As I said earlier, it would make a great color image as well, but I really want to convert this into a black and white image and make it a little bit dramatic. So, having said that, we're going to come back in here. I am not going to, normally I would go into the tone curve and use highlights, lights, darks and shadows here, but I'm a little bit worried that I am going to blow out these white areas, so I'm going to try and focus on enhancing and creating the emphasis to be all on the face of the chimpanzee. So what you've got to remember with black and white images is, for me, I can't convert any image into black and white. So things that I look for are images of very high contrast, images that have a clean background or a soft background. In this instance, it's more of a soft background. It's not a clean background. We can always blur that out later on if we want to. But typically, this is going to, for me, this stands out to be a perfect black and white image. So let's get into editing it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore all of these. I'm going to jump straight into the masking tool. Okay, normally what I do is work through the basic menu as I've mentioned before. And what I'm going to do here is just select the subject. Although it is quite sharp, what I'm going to do just to create the contrast that I want, which I normally do through using the highlights, the whites, blacks, shadows, all of that to create the contrast as opposed to the contrast slider, is I'm going to now be creating contrast on my subject itself just by using clarity, sharpness, and potentially maybe bring down the blacks and maybe lifting the highlights slightly. So having a look at the image here, we've selected our subject select, once again, pretty much spot on. You can see it's pretty much highlighted my entire subject. Here I'm going to start just by adding, although the image is nice and sharp, I'm going to add a little bit of clarity. So you can see what clarity does there. It does just add that bit of contrast. And also what happens with using clarity here is the difference between clarity, sharpness, texture. They're all very, very similar and much of a muchness, but clarity sharpens the edges of things, whereas using sharpness pretty much sharpens the entire part of the subject. So in terms of adding contrast by sharpening the edges, it just makes the subject pop a little bit more. So I'm going to lift clarity. Texture also does a similar thing. Lift that. You can see it's nice and sharp here. I was shooting with quite a large depth of field. So what you can see here, it's nice, crisp, sharp edges, nice, lots of contrast. And I was shooting at about, I think it was 7.1, so a fairly large depth of field, allowing me to have the whole head of my subject in focus. I'm going to come up the menu system. I'm just going to lift highlights slightly. Okay. I'm going to lift shadow slightly here as well. And the reason why, so I'm almost overexposing this image now, or my subject in the image, but you'll see why shortly, in that I am going to then bring down, go to the basic menu, and under exposure, I'm going to bring the exposure down slightly. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm actually just darkening the background. So I'm bringing the exposure of my subject back to what it was originally before I did the masking and used clarity. And I'm darkening the background just because there is also this very light, distracting branch in the image as well. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back into masking. Let me just do this quickly. I'm going to go zoom in. Okay, so you can see nice and crisp. Look at this beautiful glint in the eyes. I'm going to use the masking tool again, select the brush, and now this is obviously just to do a adjustment on a very specific area. So if you've watched my previous edits before, you'll know that I love the brush tool, especially for working on very specific small areas like the eye. So coming back to the image here, I'm going to highlight the eye. I've decreased, sorry, let me bring this back to 0, the feather size, just because I want to stay in these lines and make sure that I'm only selecting the eye for this. All right, so we select the eye. Okay, and what I like to try and do is, because we've got such good eye contact here, is I just want to brighten the eye slightly, get that glint really shining, and just be able to see a little bit more detail in the pupil of the chimp. Okay, so we've selected the eyes. I'm going to come back down here. What I normally like to do is just do a bit of noise reduction, and what that does is it just creates a nice, clean, clear crystal eye. I'll add a little bit of clarity. Once again, this adds contrast to my image, and then I'm going to come up. I'm going to lift shadow slightly. I know it doesn't look like it does much, but every small adjustment helps. I'm going to lift highlights as well, and what lifting highlights does, okay, this is quite a drastic lift. I've raised it by 48, is just enhance that glint. So now if we have a look at the image, you can see those eyes are really popping out nicely. So one thing that is still getting to me is this branch over here. There's a couple of ways to eliminate that. I could either just use the brush, go over that branch, and then bring down the highlights, or I could use a radial filter and darken, almost create a vignette around my subject's head. So I'm going to start with using a vignette or the radial filter. Click invert, and then I'm going to drag this over my subject, 0, okay. So as you can see here, obviously the red areas are the areas that are going to be affected by this adjustment, which is spot on. I've got quite a bit of light, if you have a look here, so I've added the radial filter, and I've got quite a bit of light in this bottom left hand side of my frame here, and I'm also including that branch which I want to try and get rid of. So I want the brightest part to be the chimp's face. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring down highlights, and once again it's only affecting the red area that I've highlighted. I've created quite a large feather here, and the reason behind that is that I don't want there to be a clear stop and start area. I want it to blend throughout the image. Okay, so we're going to bring down the highlights, which I've done. bring down the exposure as well, and look at the difference that that's making already. Okay, so you can see the shoulder here is a bit darker, which is nice. You've still got the light and the detail there, same as the left-hand shoulder of the chimp here, but my brightest part is now the chimp's face. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that as it stands. I've also eliminated a lot of the bright areas of this branch in the background here. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter. It's really looking nice. Have a look at this in full screen. But as you can also see here, so the brightest part of the chimp itself is around the nose and the mouth. So what I want to try and do here is potentially maybe either bring down the brightness around the nose, or I want to enhance the brightness around the eyes and match the brightness of the nose. So being quite a dramatic edit and a little bit more artistic, I'm going to lift the color of, or lift the brightness around the eyes to match the nose, and then we'll take it from there. So I'm going to go back, select another brush, and all I'm going to do here, remember for the eyes I brought the feather down. I'm going to lift the feather a bit as well, again, because once again I want it to blend throughout the image. Okay, and we're literally going to go over the eyes, and that's about it. You can press Alt or Option if you want to erase a little bit. I don't want to brighten the background that I've just darkened so nicely. Okay, I know it looks a little strange, but all I'm going to do here is just lift exposure slightly. So if you imagine your settings on your camera, 0.33 here is roughly a third overexposed. So I'm pretty much overexposing the eyes here by a third in comparison to the rest of the image. I'm going to lift it slightly more. And now what I'm noticing is that this area of the nose is quite bright. There's not too much detail that I can see in the nose. I like how bright the eyes are here, but this nose, obviously my eyes automatically drawn straight to the nose here. Now, with an edit like this, I am nitpicking. I do like these black and white edits because they're so dramatic, but you do have to nitpick a little bit just to get that real feel to the image that you're looking for. So I'm gonna, with this brush, just go over this bright area. Let's make my brush slightly smaller, go over these really bright areas, and then a simple solution here is just going to be to bring down the highlights. And automatically you can see the detail starting to come back there. Press enter. This is what we're sitting with. And I am pretty happy in terms of an edit and this image. You can see it's completely different from the original image. What I've done is obviously darkened the background. There's not a major amount of adjustments that I've made under the basic menu. If you have a look here, you can see I haven't really done much here at all. I've brought the overall exposure down. Remember, that was because I used subject select, selected my entire subject, brought up the exposure so that I could bring down the overall exposure to just create a bit of a darker background. And then we used the radial filter to make it even darker. And then what we did was we brightened the eyes of the subject, we darkened the nose, which was a little bit not washed out, but you didn't have as much detail as you do now. So I'm very happy with this edit. As you can see, it's a lot of small minor adjustments here and there. It's an image that when I was out in the field and having spent a lot of time with these animals, when they look up, it's a great opportunity for a photograph. And I've always wanted it where the background is a little bit darker and I have full sunlight on my subject's face, just so that I can, in post-processing, create a nice dramatic black and white image. And that's what I've done here. So when I was out in the field with guests as well, it's not just about photographing what you're seeing, but photographing, especially when it comes to black and white images, photographing your subject in a way that you're thinking about post-processing. So before you've even pressed your shutter speed, before you've changed your settings, anything like that, you recognize this opportunity to become a nice black and white image, and you shoot for that. And it makes the image and the end result and what you see here just that much more rewarding. So that's pretty much it for my behind the frame this week. I hope that you've all enjoyed this edit. I know it's a little bit different. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. Typically, I will go even more dramatic than this, but I like the feel of this. I like the branches in the background, the trees in the background. It just adds to the story. You've got the dappled lights of the forest behind there, and then you've got the nice bright sunlight on the chimpanzee's face, and all the emphasis is on the eyes looking up. So I really hope that you enjoyed this edit. If you do want me to edit any other images, please leave a comment in the comment section and I'll certainly help you out. But I hope that you all enjoyed that, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day further.